Good day, everyone. I'm Dunel Placer, and for this session, our group will be presenting another kind of pedagogy, the pedagogy for the opposition from the book Theory and Resistance in Education by Henry Giroux. The contents of this book are divided into two sections, namely, the theory and critical discourse and the resistance and critical pedagogy. Both have three chapters and a conclusion on towards a new public sphere. Now I am tasked to present the first chapter, which is the critical theory and educational practice. From this chapter, we will be able to explore the introduction, the history and background of Frankfurt School, rationality and critique, an instrumental reason, the Frankfurt notion of theory, analysis of culture, analysis of depth psychology, towards a critical theory of education, and a conclusion. So let us start with the understanding of the critical theory. According to Marcus, a critical theory emerged to prepare for the possible reunion of thought and action, which is the praxis. With this, critical theory has twofold meanings. First, it refers to the legacy of the theoretical work developed by certain members of what we call as the Frankfurt School. This Frankfurt School's legacy is the attempt to assess the emerging forms of capitalism and the changing forms of domination that accompany them, and also the attempt to rethink and radically reconstruct the meaning of human emancipation different from the Marxist perspective. The second definition of critical theory is that it refers to the nature of self-conscious critique and the need to develop a discourse on social transformation and emancipation. In other words, critical theory refers to both a school of thought, which is the Frankfurt School, and the process of critique, or the self-conscious critic, as believed to be a mode for enlightenment and emancipation. This critical theory is important for educational theories as a body of work. For further understanding of the critical theory, we will focus on the Frankfurt School. Their work focused on the legacy and claims of any theory must be confronted with a distinction between the world it examines and portrays and the world as it actually exists. And one of their central values is commitment to penetrate the world of objective appearances, to expose the underlying social relationships they often conceal. Penetrating the world here means clearly exposing social relationships and things, objects, or individuals with the world through critical theory. Now, let's know more the stand of the Frankfurt School in the issues of the society on their arguments and opposition. So for them, first, it rejected all forms of rationality that subordinated human consciousness and action to the imperatives of the universal laws. And these laws are based on scientific methods. So they argued the notions of scientific method. It argued also against the suppression of subjectivity, consciousness, and culture in history. So a new form of culture is criticized to be extending a new kind of domination. It articulated a notion of negativity or critique that opposed all theories that celebrated social harmony while leaving problematic the basic assumptions of the wider society. Its members argued that it was in the contradictions of society that one could begin to develop forms of social inquiry that analyze the distinction between what is and what should be. Compassion and sense of suffering for others are the basis for thoughts and actions, according to them, and they provided valuable insights for studying the relationship between a theory and a society. So to clearly see the relationship between theory and society, the Frankfurt School developed a dialectical framework to understand the mediations that connect institutions and activities of everyday life to the logic and commanding forces that shape the larger social totality. Through this framework emerged social inquiry, which explores the interconnection between the different areas in society, including the economic life, psychic development, transformation in the realm of culture and law, ethics, fashion, sports, public opinion, lifestyle, amusement, etc. So we are done with the stand and legacy of Frankfurt School on developing a critical theory. Now let us discover how Frankfurt School as a school of thought originated. Frankfurt School is associated with the Institute of Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, which applied Marxism, the radical radical interdisciplinary social theory was founded in 1923 by Karl Grunberg as an adjunct of the Frankfurt University. It was the first Marxist-oriented research center affiliated with a major German university, and in 1930 it was institutionally established by a wealthy merchant named Felix Weyl, who started the Marxist Study Group. Felix Weyl used to be a political science student at Frankfurt who used all his inheritance to fund an institution that would support his leftist academic aims. So during this year also, the institute came under the directorship of Marx Horkheimer. They recruited members and talented theorists, including Adorno, Fromm, Marcus, and Benjamin. These members tried to develop a theory of society based on Marx and Hegel's philosophy and utilize insights of different disciplines. They analyze social relations within capitalist economic system, and this approach is called the critical theory. They also use this critique to larger corporations, monopolies, the role of technology, industrialization of culture, and the decline of individual within a capitalist society. In 1933, Frankfurt School was forced to move for a short time to Geneva, Switzerland, as they are threatened by the Nazis because of their Marxist orientation and the fact that most of them are Jews. Adolf Hitler came into power over Germany, making them to find refuge in other countries. A year after, it was moved to US in the New York City, where it was housed in one of Columbia University's buildings. And the immigration to New York was followed by a stay in Los Angeles in 1941. And by 1953, Frankfurt School was re-established in Frankfurt, Germany. So, the early years up to the 1930, Frankfurt School primarily concerned with the analysis of the bourgeois socioeconomic substructure, but after 1930, there is a shift of their focus, which is the cultural superstructure. Also, the following events that led the Frankfurt School to refashion and rethink their analysis on domination and emancipation are the following. We have the rise of the fascism and Nazism and the failure of orthodox Marxism and the rejection of Marxist as assumptions and the rise of consumer society that made them construct a more sufficient basis for social theory and political action. Let's now move to the rationality and critique of instrumental reason. Here, the focus of the Frankfurt School is the analysis of Enlightenment rationality, which primarily refers to the importance of human reason as a mode of enlightenment that is stated it could help rescue world from chains of superstition, ignorance, and suffering. But due to the rise and influence of an industrialized society, this reason or rationality has changed. To Marx, this reason serves as a critique and emancipation, but he only overemphasized it to the economic or labor process and exchange rationality. It is in contrast to the Frankfurt School as it believed that rationalization should penetrate all aspects of everyday life and not just an economic situation. It also emphasized that reason has both positive and negative dimensions, the powers of critique and negativity. But according to Adorno, there is what we call a crisis of reason. Due to science and technology and industrialization, society also becomes highly rationalized. Thus, reason becomes instrument of the existing society. The crisis of reason here is the crisis of science and the society. And to better understand this crisis, a correct theory must be developed. So what is the analysis of the Frankfurt here? That there should be a need to develop a more fully self-conscious notion of reason which embraces elements of critique, human will, and transformative action, and they should also develop a critical theory to rescue the true function of reason from the technocratic rationality or the positivist rationality. So due to the influence to reason, the Frankfurt School criticized the technocratic or positivist thoughts and rationality, that facts are absolute, laws are universal, as positivist concept of reality through scientific method and quantitative analysis, which it believed where enlightenment can exist. It changed the way society operates. Positivism becomes enemy of reason, and it serves as the new forms of social administration and domination. So here, The Frankfurt School is against the positivist fetishism or absolutizing of facts and the lack of theoretical foundation. For them, a need to develop a critical theory is a must to emancipate society from this dominating positivist. So, for this, the question now is what are the constitutive elements essential towards a critical theory? It leads now to the Frankfurt School's notion of theory. And to develop the theory, one should know first data or facts on the relationships that exist in the society. And the facts should not be grounded on the empiricist notion that only the classification and arrangement of facts are needed towards developing a theory. For Frankfurt School, it should have also the meanings and substance from connecting theory and society and understand the significance of the facts, and that is the right social theory. So here are the summarized notions of theory by Frankfurt School. First, is the notion that as a opposition to empiricism, or it rejected the absolutizing and fetishism of facts. Second is the notion of self-criticism, that it's against positivist neutrality, that one should develop meta-theory, value-laden interest, and critical reflection. Third is the notion of immanent criticism. It means that the critical spirit of theory should be represented in its unmasking function, and it believes that a great truth wants to be criticized, not idolized. Fourth is the notion of dialectical thought, that the critical theory should function as a mode of critique and a mode of theoretical reconstruction. And the fifth one is the dialectical notion of theory and society, that experience is not limited to our observation because observation cannot be attributed to critical reflection and understanding the realm of empirical investigation. Another point is that while critical theory insists that thought and action are interrelated and their emancipatory goal, it emphasizes that the need for thought and action must have alliance rather than purely united as one, because one can dissolve the other. For example, the traditional theory points out that the concrete experience is the great teacher, which is the manifestation of emphasis more on action or the concrete experience than a theory as a source of knowledge. So, as Frankfurt School wanted to highlight critical theory than focusing on concrete experience, it criticized the value of experience that depends on how it is interpreted and defined and making it very subjective. As a general analysis of our notions of theory, Adorno, Horkheimer, and Marcuse provided that for a self-conscious human beings to act collectively against the modes of technocratic rationality, their behavior should be mediated by critical analysis. In other words, critical theory is needed. But this critical theory should have the goals of political and social emancipation and the alliance of thought and action or rationality in the interest of liberating the community and society and merging the desire for individual freedom and social freedom. Now, let's go to the Frankfurt School's analysis of the culture. So the traditional notion of culture was rejected by the Frankfurt School. They rejected that culture is an autonomous fashion unrelated to political and economic life process of society. Frankfurt School also criticized the transformation to the role of culture from Enlightenment rationality to a repressive forms of positivist rationality. Schools as mass cultural institutions have also changed their role and becomes a site for production of labor to a new technocratic and industrialized society. Here, culture is criticized as a mode of the new domination or the ideological domination as its power is spread through mass media technology, and other cultural institutions. Also, science and technology served as a dominating factor in culture, creating an industrialized culture. So that is why critical theorists coined the term culture industry, as culture becomes a new industry which is influenced by social and political domination of the capitalist. And since mass media is powerful, it made people believe that what they spread through mass media are the reality. Thus, culture standardized and rationalized that reality. Positivist rationality is really manifested in the realm of culture, and theories criticize the cultural products. Example of that is art that is already influenced by the capitalist. Art does not have any more the power to expose the real relationships in society like opposition and resistance, but rather it just serves as an aesthetic expression, pleasure, and fiction. For Marcus, the truth of art lies in its power to break the monopoly of the established reality to define what is real. In this rupture, according to him, the fictitious world of arts appears as the true reality. Another critique of the Frankfurt School is the emphasis of culture to the amusement and play as a repressive or hiding the capitalist real agenda. Thus, there is a need for collective critical consciousness and sensibility or the discourse of opposition to free society from this repression. And that critical consciousness paved the way for the Frankfurt School to analyze deaf psychology. Deaf psychology here is focusing on the unconscious of the individual as it studies the processes outside the conscious awareness. This is to help individual become aware of what not yet known or what is cast out of his consciousness. The Frankfurt School believes that the theory of consciousness and depth psychology is needed to explain the subjective dimensions of liberation and domination. Since Marx provided the understanding of the domination through political and economic dimensions, he failed to establish focus on the psychic dimensions of the individuals. Thus, Frankfurt School analyzed the formal structure of consciousness in order to discover the humanized society and how individual can also contribute to his own dehumanization, and they referred it to the critical study of Freud. So here it emphasized for Freud psychology, it emphasized here that metapsychology or the interplay between human and society, which can have an antagonistic character, and how the society reproduced its powers in and over the individual's consciousness. Also, Freud gives an idea on the dynamics of psychic domination and liberation, and his radical assumptions include first, which are the three elements in developing a depth psychology. The first one is Freud provided a psychological structure with underlying struggle between eros or life instinct, thanatos, the death instinct, and the outside world. Second, Freud studies on psychopathology, which highlights that humans have the capacity for self-destructiveness, loss of ego, and the decline of influence of family, which added to the Frankfurt's analysis of mass society and the authoritarian personality. And the third is focusing on Freud's theory of instincts and the metapsychology, in which the Frankfurt School devised a theoretical framework for unraveling and exposing the objective and the psychological obstacles to social change. Here, the theory of Freud on psychoanalysis and metapsychology can give insights on how social change can exist in society. The Here also, as analyzed by Marcuse, social repression can also be seen in our inner history. That includes our needs, satisfaction, and values. We have our needs that are part of our social routines of everyday lives. On the other hand, humans also have the capacity to desire for the false needs that as what oppressors do, thus considering it as their needs to develop their patterns and habits and become part of their lives. From the different critiques and analysis, the thoughts of Frankfurt School provides a major challenge and a stimulus to educational theorists who are critical theorists of education tied to functionalist paradigms based on assumptions drawn from a positivist rationality. So towards a critical theory of education, we have here emerged a different radical view of knowledge. So the first one is that knowledge that would instruct the oppressed about their situation as a group situated within a specific relations of domination and subordination. Also, a knowledge that would illuminate how the oppressed could develop a discourse free from distortions of their own partly mangled cultural inheritance, and a knowledge that would provide motivational connection and would link a radical history to the vision of the future and the desires and needs for a new society and the new forms of social relations. Also, towards a critical theory of education, the Frankfurt School's theory of culture offers new concepts and categories for analyzing the role that schools play as the agents of social and cultural reproduction. By illuminating the relationship between power and culture, the Frankfurt School provides a perspective on the way in which dominant ideologies are constituted and mediated via specific cultural formations. So, as a conclusion, Adorning, Horkheimer, and Marcus provide theoretical insights for developing a critical theory of education that focused on the critique of positivist rationality, their view of theory, critical reconstruction of theory of culture, and the analysis of depth of psychology. Also, critical theorists did not develop a comprehensive theoretical approach for dealing with the patterns of conflict and contradictions that existed in various cultural spheres. Lastly, critical theory needs to be reformulated to provide the opportunity to both critique and elaborate its insights beyond constraints and historical conditions under which they were first generated. It must be stressed that the insights critical theory has provided have not been exhausted. I would like to end with that. Let me end my presentation with a short quote from Paulo Freire that educator has the duty of not being neutral. We experience change. We observe some dominating authority in education, but we have the inner power as educators to resist oppressing elements. And that small power, when collectively shared, becomes a powerful tool to influence the young minds to be instruments leading to a free and better society. With that, thank you for listening.